continuing with this theory of ulama abrar, although to thoroughly go through the whole theory and to try and criticize and respond to it would take much more than a few lectures, but to that degree which is feasible, inshallah, I don't want to spend too much time on this theory. In the book of Crisis and Consolidation, Sayyid Hussein Mudarrisi writes, the Shiites believed that when the time came, the true Imam would take up arms, expel the usurpers, and regain his proper place. Many Shiites hoped that when this occurred, they would be the reigning party and would finally be free from the persecution they had so long endured. On the other hand, it seems that by the late 1st, early 8th century, so the late 1st being after Hijrah, 8th means AD, the belief was already well established in the Muslim community that at some future time, a revolutionary leader from the house of the Prophet would rise up, overthrow the unjust government, and establish the rule of justice and truth, referring to the Mahdi. Now he says at the end of the late 1st century. It may even be before that, because we have prophetic traditions pertaining to the Holy Messenger in relation to the Mahdi, in relation to the 12 successors coming after me, in relation to them being from Bani Hashim, and so on and so forth. This millenarian figure was called by the Shiites the Qa'im, the one who rises up. In the early 2nd century of the Hijrah, as popular discontent with the Umayyads grew ever more pervasive, many hoped that Imam Muhammad al-Baqir would lead an insurrection against the oppressive parties. He did not do so. This stance surprised Shiites, whose conceptions of the Imam of the house of the Prophet, of Ahlul Bayt, required him to take action when conditions were propitious. When asked why, despite his many followers in Iraq, he had not led the awaited rising, he excused himself, Imam Baqir, according to his, by saying that he was not the awaited Qa'im, and that the Qa'im would appear in the future when the time was right for such a step. Now, see, he knew he wasn't the Qa'im. It wasn't as if, he realized that. 2 decades later, however, his son, Ja'far as-Sadiq, also failed to act at a time that many considered ideal for the Imam. Look, it's really incredible how he attributes failure to Imam Sadiq. He failed to act at a time that many considered ideal. So it was ideal according to many, but not according to Imam Sadiq. That many considered ideal for the Imam if he had sincerely wished to do so. That if Imam Sadiq had sincerely wished to do so, now was the time he should have gone against the oppressive parties. You see, this is the understanding, this is how he's explaining the status of the Imams. He did not act, Imam Ja'far Sadiq, and the disillusionment led the Shiites to re-examine long established beliefs. So they were always waiting for a qiyam to happen. For Imam Baqir, it didn't happen. They were a bit disillusioned. 2 decades later, it didn't happen with Imam Sadiq. Then they said, oh, something's happening here. We have to change our belief system. Look. And then, a page later, he says, even for those who emphasized the political role of the Imam, Ja'far as-Sadiq's failure to assume an active political role resulted in a major reconsideration of the institute of Imamate. That is very important. Have that in mind. We'll come to that later. Because of how they appeared, they said the Imam has failed to do what it should have been done. Because political Islam was the major priority that they thought this is going to happen. So now it's not happening. There was a shift and reconsideration in the institute of Imamate. How? The Imam was no longer the long-awaited savior. Well, we knew that from day one. The Holy Prophet had given us. It wasn't that they were all called Qa'im. But we all knew that the 12th had a particular scenario. At least this was no longer considered to be his major role. Now, for them, like the others, the Imam was the head of religion. In this manner, the community changed the emphasis of the institution of Imamate from political to religious authority. Hisham ibn al-Hakam's theory, a student of Imam Baqir and Imam Sadiq, Hisham ibn al-Hakam's theory of the Imam's divine protection against sin and error, Ismat, was a major contribution to further accommodate the shift. You see? In these 2 or 3 paragraphs, this is only the beginning of the book, page 9. The whole book is like this. Something which a year 1 history seminary student can easily find the problems with such a thinking. But don't get me wrong, I'm still on my, as I said before, and I'm not saying it out of humility. Hussein Mudarrisi is a stronger scholar than me, but he's not ma'soom. This was wrong. I can say this much. And it's not me saying it, even when this happened years ago. It was a long time ago when this first came out in Rome. Yes, everyone was against it. It was laughable. They couldn't understand why such a person would write such a thing. He was born and raised in Rome. So here the point is this, that a school of thought such as Imamate, does this change with the times, or is it the people's understanding of it which changes? Here, the way he's phrased the last 2 paragraphs that I've read, it was as if the institute is evolving. Imamate is evolving. And terms like Imam Sadiq failed to do so. It wasn't his duty. Imam Sadiq, many times he said, if I had the number of companions which number the same number as sheep there are in the land here, I would have rose up. And then those reports say there were only about 16 or 17 sheep. He didn't even have that many true companions for a qiyam. And then the idea that Hisham ibn Hakam introduced this idea of Ismat is incredible. This was something, as I said, the school of thought, its roots are in the Quran. The Quran was there from day one. To say that Shias have been politically failing Now let's make the Imam the head of religion. So let's now introduce this theme. It's called Ismat. What kind of thing is this? Has Hisham ibn Hakam really said such a thing? He was a student of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, a good student. Why would he say such a thing? So naturally you would say, okay, where's the reference here? The reference for this book. And he says this is the reference for this theory, which says, see in footnote number 33, see the article Isma in Encyclopedia Islamica, volume 2, which is made by the British. See the article on Isma by W. Madilang. Good grief. Was there a drought? Was there a problem? You couldn't find others? The wealth of information, you had to limit this key theory of yours, that crisis and consolidation. There's a crisis in the Shia Imamate. It wants to consolidate, to become stronger. There's a shift. They introduced Ismat. Where did this come from? A German scholar of Islam? No, I don't have any problem with. His name is Wilfred Madilang. I thought first it was Wilfred, but it's Wilfred. And he was he studied in very good university and everything, and he's passed away now, but it was in contemporary times. But this is wrong. Now, for those then who went and looked at the Encyclopedia Islamica volume 2 on the Ismat, when you go through it, then you see Madilang refers to a Shia theologian of the early centuries who says Hisham ibn Hakam is saying this. That's it. Good, how they came to this conclusion. Yes, so it's always good to, when someone gives a theory, look, we've had 1400 centuries of Islam. 1400 centuries of scholarly work has evolved slowly but surely. When someone says something which is totally out of the blue, first of all, the community shouldn't panic. Why do you panic? Don't worry. You have 1400 centuries behind you. Don't be so weak. And then go and analyze what they are saying. The more scrutiny you exercise, the more the weaknesses of their arguments become apparent. You just have to put it into scrutiny and ask scholars. You have to refer to true scholars to tell you, to enlighten you, inshallah. Okay. And it continues. So the point was, with a school of thought, the school of thought doesn't change. The Quran doesn't change. The message of the Quran was eternal, is eternal, and how it describes certain figures, certain articles of faith, they hold until the end of time. But how do we understand them? Without a doubt, those in the beginning, even amongst the students of the Imams, there were differences amongst them. And that much we've discussed in the last session. That even amongst the students of the Imams. And then we have 250 years of Imamate. As the years progressed, you see people who would have a very limited understanding of who the Imam was from day one. They became much more cultivated and developed in who the Imam is. You see the shift more and more, understanding it. And that's because the intellects are evolving. And I gave a few examples in the last session between the different scholars who are different understandings in relation to the Imam. But the Imam is Imam, and it's mentioned in the Quran, and it's highlighted. Now, as we progress, it seems we keep on understanding more and more about the Imam. And that's because of the nature of the Quran. Now, this next point is that here, those who couldn't tolerate certain beliefs which had come out, they would accuse them of ghulu, of exaggeration. They were qali, those who exaggerate the status of the Imam. So, I want to just speak for a few minutes on this ghulu, because some people accuse some of ghulu rightfully, and some accuse others of ghulu wrongfully. Was ghulu a phenomenon? Without a doubt. It existed, it is wrong, and without a doubt we are against ghulu. But because of this gradual evolving of people's intellects and understandings of the Imam, the limited people did, and it may have been out of sincerity too, they accused those who had a very good understanding of the Imam from day one, they accused them of ghulu. So that was a wrong application there. But there were many applications where the accusation was more. It was a true example, it was definitive examples of ghulu, which is definitely haram. So, there were cases where they would say that the person of the Imam, they say he was a deity. He was God. We have those in history. They said he was God. That's definitely haram. There were those who said he is a prophet. Now, if you remember in the last session, there were quite a number of them because of certain misunderstandings, but they withered away very quickly. A small minority persisted with this, that the Imam is a prophet. That is also an example of ghulu, which is haram. Some thought that the Imam is independent from Allah. And we dare also, that is ghulu, and we say it's haram. And some people even believe that the Imams would be reincarnated. Yes. That also is ghulu. And some believe that they would never die. The Imams would never die. These were examples of rightfully, pointing to people and saying, this is wrong. This is ghulu. This can't be accepted. And if they ask us why, we have to show them the Quran. This idea that you're independent from Allah, or God forbid you are a deity, or you are a prophet, all these, one by one, we go to the Quran and say, this is why it's ghulu and why it's wrong. And these people were treated very severely by the Imams, even during the time of Amir al-Mu'mineen. They existed, and some were sentenced to death. It was when the essence of religion is being compromised, they sentence. You can't mock religion. And the general trends that we see, Imam after Imam, in relation to these people who exercised ghulu, was that don't socialize with them. Don't speak with them. Just isolate yourselves from them. Reject them. Curse them. All these we have, these instructions. But it's in relation to this, those who are rightfully accused of being ghulu. But there were many who were accused of ghulu when it wasn't on a par with the Quran. I mean, ghulu, which wasn't ghulu, they truly understood the status of the Imam or the Prophet, but because of limited understandings of others, they were accused of ghulu and they put them in the same bag as the first group. This was a problem. This was a problem. Because once you would be appended to the first group of ghulu, your death certificate is signed. And that's why Imam Sadiq, in relation to Khunais, Ibn Khunais, kept on saying, look, don't. Keep it to yourself. They'll kill you. And he was killed at the end. So it's a very sensitive period. But ghulu, as we've explained, that with those definitions, no one accepts. But sometimes there's quluf not in relation to the person, the personality of the Imam being God or a prophet or being independent from God, or no. Sometimes there's quluf in relation to the excellencies and the attributes of the Imams, the miracles of the Imams, or attributes of excellence, the fada'il. This area has been an area of controversy, even amongst the Shias, the students of the Imams, and even the period after the Imams. The first schools of thought in Iraq and Qom, the Baghdadi school in Iraq, the Qumi school in Iran, the main scholars there, Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, and the likes in Baghdad, Sheikh Saduq, his father, in Qom. Here, there was even amongst them difference of opinion, not in relation to the qulub of deity or ascribing, independence. No, that everyone accepted. But the fada'il of Ahlul Bayt, things that we may take for granted today, this was a big area of controversy in those times. Even terms like ismat, there were differences of understanding. Even during the time of Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Saduq, ismat, which we take for granted today, even there they still didn't understand it. Sheikh Mufid would say, if they committed small sins before they were made Imam, that wouldn't be problematic. Or Sheikh Saduq said, no, they can forget things. Sahlun Nabi, the Prophet can even forget things, and he gives an example of Salat. In relation to revelation, he says, no, he doesn't forget there. In relation to matters directly concerned with his guiding of the people, the Prophet doesn't forget, but on personal issues, Sheikh Saduq said he may forget. And he brings a hadith. Look, these things, and then sometimes Sheikh Mufid was a student of Sheikh Saduq, but he says, why does Sheikh Saduq write a book on aqa'id? He is just a transmitter of ahadith. He should write a book on aqa'id. There were a lot of criticisms with one another, or even ilm al-ghayb. Well, no. Some said no, they don't have ilm al-ghayb. Others said that no, they do, but it's limited. Sometimes they know a few things inside the hearts of people, and it's not something wajib anyway to have. Whereas, as we'll show inshallah tomorrow, ilm al-ghayb, it's wajib for the Imam to have it. If we've understood yahduna bi'amrihi properly, it's inseparable of the Imam to have ilm al-ghayb. And we'll discuss that in detail. The point is, there were differences amongst these schools, and sometimes they would attack one another. For example, the Baghdadi school would call the Qumi school muqassira, as in, you're doing a bit of shortcoming in relation to the fada'il of Ahlul Bayt. Because there were miracles attributed to the Imams, or I think even like things like ismat, or being this ilm al-ghayb, receiving such knowledge from Allah, they couldn't accept it. Many couldn't accept this. But today, it's a given. Ayatollah Bahjat, rahmatullah alayh, said Sheikh Saduq believed in two things that a child who's a beginner in Shiism today in the local mosque has accepted. And this shows what? Just look how much the evolution of the minds of people have developed over this time. Those two were, one was Sahlun Nabi, where Sheikh Saduq believed that the Prophet would forget or act negligently, or rather inadvertently, Sahl. And the other one was Alam Adhar. Sheikh Faroukh didn't believe it. Many didn't believe it. Sheikh Mufid didn't believe it. Allama Hindi in the 7th century didn't believe it. He said, no, if with our traditions it goes against the Quran, we don't. But why does everyone believe it today? Although the way they explain it is problematic. Many people, they explain Alam Adhar in a way which is on a par with reincarnation. But, okay, when you see it in the Quran and in the Ahadith, why reject it? Isn't it a bit too early to say it goes against rationality, so it must be wrong? We don't know. So why the scholars after you, 1 century after the other, eventually led to a time now everyone accepts it. And they've explained it. And there's references in the Quran in relation to this, but the mechanisms at play, the quality of it, yes, it has to be explained properly. But I'm saying, look how there's always been an evolving of our understanding. But not that anyone's changed the institution of Imamate or religion, but our understandings. That's why the Quran is always the criterion. You want to know if something has exited religion or not? The Quran. You say Ilmul Ghaib has exited. Let's look at the Quran. كل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. Everything has been enumerated in the clear Imam. Or for example, in relation to man indahu ilmul kitab, one who gave witness with the Holy Messenger, said, this person who gave witness with the Holy Messenger, before them was ilmul kitab, referring to Amirul Mu'mineen. See, there are many references in the Quran. Before we suddenly say no, the criterion is the Quran. Once the Quran is understood, the traditions will be understood much better. And I'll speak more about this and things related to it tomorrow, inshallah, with Ilmul Ghaib. Anyway, this was a problem then. So, qulub in relation to the fada'il wasn't really qulub. It was some people couldn't absorb it, couldn't attribute this to the Imams. Some people could. But today, everyone can attribute it very easily. One of the reasons why was because during the centuries, they saw true scholars who had visions, who did incredible things. When the likes of Sayyid ibn Tawus of around 800, in the 8th century, when he comes and says, I have seen Allah and have embraced Him, and he describes his relationship spiritually with Allah in a manner which until then no one would say, but since he was such an authority, when he said it, they said, well, he's not lying, we all know him. And when people like him and others like Bahrani and Khaji Nasiruddin Tusi, during the years, they would say things, experience things, then they all went back to those traditions that they had discarded, the ahadith. But if they've experienced it, these ahadith, then there may be a reality. They went back to them. Because before they would reject the ahadith because of their aql, because of their understanding of the Quran. But now they say, no, this is happening. People are experiencing. If Sayyid ibn Tawus is saying, I'm seeing Allah, well, of course the Imams can see Allah. Now what does seeing Allah mean? Not a physical seeing. So see, all these very slowly but gradually molded the minds of people that today now all these things are basic. Now, if there are scholars today who want to go back to day one and stick onto a limited, deficient understanding by a select few, there must be an agenda here. Why would they want to do that? Why would they want to do that? It's incredible. And it won't hold. Then another name, in addition to the Qali, was the Mufawwidha. This is also attributed to the Shias mainly. To understand the Mufawwiza movement, two terms have to be understood before I explain this. When two things are horizontal to one another, it means they are independent from one another. Like two students in a class, they're horizontal to one another in learning knowledge. I.e., this one learns knowledge independent from B, and B learns knowledge independent from A. There are two students independent from one another in the classroom, they're horizontal to one another. But sometimes two things are vertical to one another. And this means if A is here and B is here, and they're vertical to one another, and they may even say the same thing, but B is dependent in that whatever the attribute, like knowledge for example, upon A, and is giving this knowledge out, but giving it dependent on A. Here we say these two are vertical to one another. The Mufawwiza movement, and there were haram elements to it, but overall it was something which was very normal in Shiite beliefs, because they always looked at things vertical to Allah and dependent upon Allah. That was the line. So when that is your thinking, true tafweed would not ever result, because you're always vertical to Allah, and therefore the dependency was there. But there were some, like the Mu'tazilites and others, who brought forth certain ideas whereby they would say we become then vertical to Allah, horizontal to Allah. For example, Allah creates us, and then in relation to our actions, we are totally independent from Allah. Okay? That we have a problem with. The Quran has a problem with, and encompassing Tawheed has a problem with this. If one understands true Tawheed, this would never arise. There were some who were Mufawwiza in this way, that they said there are certain parts of the body attributed to Allah, like hand, feet, eyes. Some believed it was physical. Allah has physical feet, hands, but we don't know what the quality of it. Some people were Mufawwiza in this line, saying, look, just leave it to Allah. We don't know, but don't deny that Allah has feet and hands. That also we don't accept, the idea of Allah having physical feet, hands and everything. Yes, Allah's hand, He has a hand, but it's not a physical hand. It has a particular meaning. And so on and so forth. That was a small group. But the major area of contention was this. That, and this is within the Shias, that the Mufawwiza said, yes, we accept that there are many things Allah has given us, and we're not like the haram group of tafweed who say they are horizontal to Allah. We say also we are vertical to Allah, meaning we do depend, but still some things you're saying that we don't accept. So if you say Allah assigns the matters of religion to the Imam or the Prophet, we say yes, He assigns it. He does tafweed, give it to the Imams, they manage the matters of religion, but they're still dependent on Allah. We have no problem there. If you say matters in relation to the managing of society, we have no problem there. In relation to monetary affairs, khums and zakat, no problem. But they say, look, you're saying creation now. You're passing the limit now. You're saying these people create, the Imams give life, take away life. They give sustenance. Say, come on, we can't accept this. Even though you say it's vertical to Allah, they say we don't accept this. Now this is between two Shias here. In the beginning, if someone was to say this, they would be treated very badly. They should fear their lives, for their lives. So here, when you say the Imams grant life, take away life, provide sustenance, create, even though you're saying it's vertical to Allah, bi'idhnillah, so to speak, in an encompassing way, it's all dependent on Allah. In relation to the creative duties, they would have a problem. They wouldn't accept it. But there were those who did accept, because of the way they saw the Imam as a maximum manifestation of Allah's attributes. And yahduna bi'amrihi was a providential order. So you see, these are some, differences that were always there. And in relation, so the two places where you can say are definitively ghali and mufawwidh and definitely haram, and the Imams have gone against it, was when they deify the person of the Imam, or say he's totally independent, or say he never dies. That was haram. And here Imam Rida has said this is kufr. It's just, they're kafir, whoever says that. And in relation to that, the Imams, albeit vertical to Allah, them creating and doing this, that we're saying people accepted. But there were some who said this creating, giving life, taking life, giving sustenance was done horizontal to Allah. Imam Reza said that's shirk. He called that shirk. But that which was horizontal and vertical to Allah, that's no problem, because it's all Allah doing it. You're not assigning independence to the Imam. So this is after centuries now, we're very comfortable in speaking about these, and we think, like Ayatollah Bahçe said, this is step one. A beginner's Shi'ism is of this level, we all accept. Okay. Now, here in this Ulama Abrar, they use Sheikh Sadur to prove their point. They say, look, from the 2nd or 3rd century to the 5th century after Hijrah, so at the end of occultation to the 5th century, they say, look, most scholars, especially after the minor occultation, most scholars rejected the supernatural states of the Imams. They rejected that the Imams were divinely appointed. They rejected that the Imams were ma'soom from birth. They rejected the idea that the Imams have ilmul ghayb. And those who would accept these, they would say this is ghulu. Look, they're saying that there were scholars who said this isn't part of religion. Most of the scholars were like this. The Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Sadur, Sheikh Tusi, people who were extremely essential for the development and progression of Shi'ism, and today the seminaries in Qom are indebted to these people. But look, there was a gradation in even their understandings. So you see, and they use this, they say, why has Shi'ism been lost? They say, why didn't we go back? That was Shi'ism. Today isn't Shi'ism. That was Shi'ism. Let's go back to the time of Sheikh Sadur, what they believed in. What do we say? We say, there's no problem, let's speak. And the Quran is our guide. We have to use the Quran at the end to see. We have to base our understanding of the Imam based on. And all the scholars now or have views today, for example in Qom today, in Iraq today, how they understand being divinely appointed by Allah, ilmul ghayb, ilmul ladunni, ismat, everyone accepts it today. But now we see people say, no, we have to go back to true Shi'ism. We've lost our heritage. They're deficient. It was a result of a deficiency of the perceptions of Imamate. What's the need to grasp onto that? We've had centuries, we've grown centuries after centuries. We've had people died because of their beliefs and this and that. be rest assured, if Sheikh Mufid was to come today, if Sheikh Saduq, they would accept it. They would see how the houses have grown. Now, but in the time of Sheikh Saduq, who was one of the heads of the Qummi school, so after Uqul, Sheikh Saduq was born in 306 AH after Hijrah. Minor occultation ended at 329 after Hijrah, if I'm not mistaken, the numbers. The 12th Imam knew of Sheikh Saduq's father. The deputies would say he would pray for Sheikh Saduq's father. It's very interesting to read the messages that the deputies, especially the main four, Usman ibn Sa'id, Muhammad ibn Usman, and two others, I can't remember all the names now, Hussein ibn Ruh and one other. They were intermediaries in the time of minor occultation between the Imam and the people. Imagine 70 odd years of this happening. And they would know when they were going to pass away. The Imam would tell them. So they would assign someone. Although Usman ibn Sa'id, the first deputy, was living in the time of the 10th Imam. The 11th Imam approved him as his wakil. Even the 11th Imam, they were well known, and said, you will be a wakil also for my son. Many people saw the 12th Imam. Many scholars, these have been written by so many sources that sometimes I think us scholars, since we haven't opened this up too much, because we thought people may find it boring going through all these stories, people are really beginning to forget. And then someone has the audacity to say the 12th Imam hasn't come yet or doesn't exist. These things are very far from rationality. But those 70 years with the deputies, the letters, the messages, the ruling authorities in fiqh, in aqa'id, around the world would ask questions and they would provide the answers, they would be content. Everyone accepted this. And then those messages are very important. And the chains of transmission, because they come from earlier scholars, most of them it's unproblematic because we don't have too many chains. Sheikh Saduq himself has brought many of these in relation to the messages of the four deputies. And I'm surprised how some people criticize these messages and say this message can't be from the 12th Imam. We say, why? They say even if the chain of transmission is correct, we don't accept it. Why though? They say because in one of the messages it says, the 12th Imam says, khums is halal for you, i.e. you're free from khums. You don't have to give khums anymore. And like this, with the children that you bear, they will be halal. And they say it's impossible that the 12th Imam says there's no need for us Shias to give the khums. Based on that, they discredit the whole message. This is one part of the message. They discredit, and they even say this hasn't come from the 12th Imam. If they would only a little bit look at the context of the message every time, they would change their impression 100%. There was a war, and the Abbasi illegitimate regime would take the spoils of war, the war booty, so to speak. And one of the things that you have to give khums on is the war booty, things that you get from war. And here, when that comes to the hands of a Shia, they say, no, you can't, because it has to go to the Imam. The khums of it has to be given. And the legitimate authority is the Imam. You haven't given it to the Imam. so we're not going to touch anything from that wall. Then the Imam, so this was a problem for the Shias, the Imam came during the time of the minor occultation and said, no, the khums is all halal, don't worry about it. You can spend it, buy it and everything. That was the context, not the khums of your surplus of income. You see, and the Marajis have all commentated, given a commentary on this. The scholars have given a commentary on this. You know, you have to kind of look at the context and see how scholars, what they've said about this. Now here, you know, slavery was something which, when Islam came, slavery existed. You know, even with alcohol, Islam didn't come in from day one and say drinking alcohol is haram. There was a process they underwent in phases. Slavery came, it was so ingrained in the culture, they didn't come and say this is haram. They adapted with it in a particular way. But before I mention that, slavery in those days wasn't like slavery today, or slavery of 200 years ago, where from the African continent, for example, what America did, England did, all those. Slavery, in the context we're discussing, was only prisoners of war. Those who wanted to destroy Islam. Either before the war they give in, or they don't start the war. But if they continue to war, whoever's taken in, male or female, will be regarded as slave. That's the definition of a slave, of that context, not today's context. Well, I mean, 200 years ago, the slavery issue. Although even today, one can say in America and England and many countries, they're all modern slaves. The way the system of these mortgages and debts, and lending and everything, they're all like slaves under their authority. They can't do anything. They have to, like animals, work, given hours, give this, do that, and so, but they were prisoners of war in those days. It was prisoners of war. Now, when you get a prisoner of war, what do you do with them? You can either kill them, which that's not a very rational thing to do. From day one, just kill them. You can just put them into prison. Islam doesn't have that either. Why just imprison them? Why? Can't you do anything more constructive? Or you can free them. But why would you free them when they were an enemy of Islam? They wanted to destroy Islam. That was the definition we gave of prisoners of war, of being a slave. So freeing them too wouldn't be very rational from day one. Or you would take them in as your slave and purchase them. And in that war, the context of this letter, a number of the slaves, a number of the spoils of war, they were female slaves there. And the Shias would purchase them, but now they said, no, we can't, because the khums hasn't been given. The Abbasi regime should have given the khums to the rightful authority. We're not going to touch them. Well, if they didn't do them, they would have suffered in their own livelihoods. The Imam said, the khums is halal for you, there's no need to give it until our command, until the manifestation of our command. Ela dhuhure amrina. That's it. It was only that kind of khums. Not all the other types of khums which existed too, that you continue to give. You see how, not analyzing the context, a totally different understanding would be given. Now, how would the Imams deal with slaves? They were models for us. When they would have the slave in, they would educate the slave. They would have akhlaq before the slave. And then finally would free the slave. And in Islam it says, for the kafarat, for example, one way is to free slaves. This is enhancing the freedom of slaves. Before you do it though, educate them. Why were they ready to destroy Islam? Educate them, show them your true worth, akhlaq, and so on and so forth. And then when you free them, they'll never look at Islam in a negative way again. some of these slaves, when the husband wanted them back, they were not ready to go back because of the love of Islam that was cultivated in their hearts. So that was Islam's way. Anyway, I drifted a bit, but anyway, so yes, so here Sheikh Sadour, I think we were here, yes, because of these tensions that existed in aqaid in the 3rd to the 5th century, time of the minor occultation to the 5th century, time of Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Sadour, Sheikh Tusi, Sheikh Sayyid Murtada. There were tensions. Sheikh Sadour came with a classification. He said, whoever believes in these few things, they are ghali, they will be qulub. This ulama abroad people, this is very important for them. They say, look at these, especially one of them, and then when this is proved for them, they say, therefore, there's no divine appointment of the imam, or there's no ismat, or there's no ilm al-ghayb for them. The logic is wrong, as we shall see. But what were the criteria to be a qulub, to be a qali? According to Sheikh Sadour, one of the heads of the Qummi school in the 4th century. If you believe that the Imam is Rabb, yes, if you believe that the Imam is a Lord, like Allah, yes, even in the time of Imam Ali, there were people like that, they were killed, yes. This is plain kufr. It's even, even Sheikh Sadour says they're worse than Christian, Jews, whatever. Yes, worse than the whole thing. Any kind of innovator, he said, you can imagine these are worse than that. When they say Allah is Rabb, when the Imam is Rabb. And today, now we don't have them, but they existed. Then Sheikh Sadour said, Mufawwidh, but not in matters of religion or actions or in horizontal to Allah, not in those. But if you say the Imams would create, give sustenance, give life, take away, albeit horizontal, if you're of that, you're also ghali. Oh, that's not going to go well with Sheikh Mufid. See? If you say matters of religion, no, there's no problem there. To say the Prophet or the Imam, yes, was given to execute Allah's command. Yes, but even then it's vertical to Allah. But there's no problem there. مَا آتَاكُمُ الرَّسُولُ فَخُذُوهُ. That which the Prophet comes from us to the Prophet, you take. And that's one of the reasons why ahadith is important. It's things which have come to us from the Prophet, from the Imams. It's an Quranic instruction. That which the Prophet brings to you, take. That which he dissuades you from, refrain from. But when you say the Prophet or the Imam gives sustenance, takes life, these attributes, you're qali, according to Sheikh Sadour. But today, that would mean most of our maraji are qali. Some people, so when you see people are, in my very humble opinion, if Sheikh Sadour was here today, he wouldn't accept this. But when you see some people want to go back and re-enlive this, rejuvenate this kind of understanding, when they know all the Maraja accept it, I think they wouldn't mind to attack the Maraja in such a way and call them ghali and weaken their authority. So the agenda is suspicious. Why someone would want to stick to Sheikh Sadour, period. Yes. Some would say the Imams don't die. Sadour says they are ghali. Some would say, they say the Imams, and us too, we don't need to do prayer. We don't have to do ibadat. Whoever says ibadat are not necessary, they are ghali. Even those who say people can do alchemy, converting metals to gold, that kind of thing, that is ghali. But this, which is number 4 on the list, this one was very sensitive. Whoever rejects the idea of sahwun nabi is a ghali. Sahwun nabi is that the Prophet was forgetful or inadvertent in matters which isn't pertaining to guiding the masses. Sheikh Saduq believed, yes, the Prophet may have been inadvertent at times. He may have done a 3 unit as 4 unit, or a 4 unit as 3 unit. It was his personal thing. He forgot or was inadvertent to the prayers. Many people couldn't accept this, even at that time. He says, whoever doesn't accept it, whoever rejects this idea that the Prophet was inadvertent in matters pertaining to personal things, they are ghali. Okay. And he brings a hadith too. And the hadith, its content is that that Allah wanted people to see that the Prophet would, for example, in the example of the salat, would be inadvertent in his number of units of salat, so it would be a relief for the people. They can be, oh, so it's just like us. It's like us, for example. So this theory of ulama abrar, when they mention this, they say there's a relationship between belief in sahwun nabi and the rejection of supernatural states. When you have to believe in sahwun nabi and therefore sahwun imam. Sahwul imam, therefore, so there's no supernatural powers that they have. They too, like us, they forget things. And this is wrong. And the reason why we say wrong, because Sheikh Saduq has written books. He's written other books. Okay, he has this opinion. Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh, who is a scholar who has never spoken ill of any of the scholars, or even semi-mocked a scholar of old. Very polite. Very rarely I've seen someone like that. And even contemporary scholars, when he doesn't accept something, he doesn't bring their names, or very, very indirectly. But in relation to Sahwun Nabi that Sheikh Saduq believed that the Prophet had, Ayatollah Hassan Zadeh said, well, I'm now in doubt between Sahwun, the inadvertency of the Prophet, versus the inadvertency of Sheikh Saduq. And with your permission, I'd rather side that Sheikh Saduq may be inadvertent rather than the Prophet. You see, yes. But then we say that yes, Sheikh Saduq believed in this. No one denies that. As I say, there's an evolving of aqaid we see throughout the centuries. But he has written other books. One of those books is I'tiqadat. It's on the Shia Creed. It's translated into English too. It's taught in Qom. There it says the Imams were higher than the archangels. They're the most superior of all creatures. They say the reason Adam prostrated, it was before the light of the Imam. Adam's prostration. Sheikh Saduq is saying this. He's saying the station of the Prophet, somewhat greater than the others, is a function of how much ma'rifah of Ahlul Bayt they had. They say the whole cosmos was created for the Ahlul Bayt. Imam's orders is Allah's orders. And then Ismat, he says, they had Ismat from major and minor sins. Sheikh Mufid even in Ismat was a bit weaker than Sheikh Saduq. So the belief in Sahwun Nabi that Sheikh Saduq had didn't make him falter in his Ismat. He said just because he had Sahwun Nabi, the Prophet or the Imams may be inadvertent at times, he still said they'll never sin. As if that doesn't compromise their Ismat status if they have Sahwun Nabi. It's in his books. And matters of tafweed in his books he mentions, except for the idea of them creating and ilm al-ghayb, ilm al-laduni, all these Sheikh Saduq men, and they're saying no, ulama abrar. Sheikh Saduq says they do sahwa nabi, so they can't have supernatural states. But if they had just looked elsewhere, a bit of research, this conclusion would be a wrong conclusion. Okay. Now, tomorrow inshallah we'll speak about this idea of ilm al-ghayb in more detail. There are three positions. One is that they don't have ilm al-ghayb, that we've covered partially. One is that they have absolute knowledge of the unseen. Absolute, not potential. In absolute terms, in actuality. What does that mean? They would never learn anything. The Imams don't learn. Nothing new. They would learn nothing new. They know everything. In actuality, not potentially. That we call an extremist view. We'll go through verses of the Quran which go against that. Ulama abrar were, as the Baghdadis say, the muqassira. A lot of shortcomings, the way they explain the Imam. But there is a moderate view. This moderate view today is ruling Shiite ideology. Now people may not understand it and may have some misconceptions about it, but this is ruling, and this inshallah I'll open up tomorrow. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammad wa ala tahirin.